Hello and welcome to what I hope will be a series of little videos on MS symptoms, multiple sclerosis symptoms. I hope to keep those videos short, but the curve of my conversation comes with a lot of tangents. You know me. Well, I guess some of you know me. Okay, some of you know some of me. See, that's happening already. Okay, back on track. I wanted to talk about multiple sclerosis symptoms because I think the central mystery, as it were, of MS is how unpredictable it is, and that I would like to kind of provide some information to people suffering from MS, but also something that would be aimed at their friends, acquaintance, family, carers, colleagues, employers, anyone who interacts with a person with MS, to shed some light on on the symptoms, obviously, but really on the unpredictability of the disease, because I think that contextualizing it really helps. I think about it like the weather. If you were, I don't know, in the 1600s on a desert island, you're just a victim of the weather. Sometimes it's sunny, sometimes it's raining, and sometimes it's a storm. You don't really know more, and you live day to day, and that can be quite, well, that it is what it is, but you are at the mercy of the elements, quite literally. Whereas if you have study meteorology, you can contextualize the fact that, okay, it's raining because there's a low pressure zone that's going to come for a couple of days, and maybe it's coming from the north, so the air's going to be cold and all that stuff. And in a way, that does help making sense. Well, help plan your holidays, if anything, and your barbecues. But also, I think it does help making sense of an otherwise rather chaotic system. And so I hope to do the same thing for MS in a way, sort of like the Met Office of neurological Met Office. Okay, so symptoms. Where do they come from? So the first thing is we probably have to explain what multiple sclerosis is. Very briefly, multiple sclerosis is an autoimmune neurodegenerative disease. So it means that if the nervous system is the UK's music scene, then your immune system is like Simon Cowell, in that it's not going to come in and destroy it in one go, but steadily, year after year, it's going to make little subsections and areas of it ruined, and ruin them for everyone. So yes, the immune system attacks the central nervous system, the brain and spinal column. It causes nerves damage indirectly. That's the first important point that also goes a long way to explaining the unpredictability of MS, how symptoms occur, how symptoms recur, they come and go. Because the immune system, sorry, the cat is just being a bit attention-seeking. She picks it up from me. The immune system attacks the central nervous system, and it actually destroys not so much the nerves themselves as the insulation sheath of what we call myelin. I might kind of write it down as a kind of keyword here. I don't know if you can see the whiteboard very well, but I apologize for the sort of unflattering low angle, but this is very much homebrew production, and also I've not obviously prepared that, so I'm kind of spitting it off the dome. I think that's pretty visible. Right, the immune system attacks the myelin, the insulation sheet of the nerve. So it's if you think of the brain as a big bag of electrical cables, it's as if some of those cables will have their rubber insulation stripped off. So that leads to kind of short circuits. And also the cables themselves are exposed to the elements. They might rust, for instance. So that manifests as lesions, areas of scarring in the brain, where there is reduced nerve conductivity or nerve damage altogether. This is very important because really it's not the immune system doing the nerve damage, it's what subsequent exposure from unprotected by myelin does. And because it's possible to actually recreate myelin, to have remyelination, a very important, something that all MS patients I think are aiming for in one way or another, then you can kind of get back some of that insulation, and effectively nothing is really lost forever. And even then, if there's an area where there's damage, you have to trust the neural plasticity of the brain and that will hopefully create paths and pathways, as they call, around the damaged area. I'll come back to that later, I'm sure. So then, symptoms. Well, if you think about it, I'm sure you will have noticed that quite a large number of our functions, physical and mental, are mediated by somehow or produced, by the central nervous system. Arguably, all of them, if you're a materialist. That's an interesting point, because if you think that there is such a thing as an immaterial soul, arguably the soul doesn't have MS, because it can't. I personally don't believe that, but I suppose that if you do believe in a soul, you can find solace in the fact that your body and your brain might be sick, but your soul isn't, and should shine through. That's one way to look at it. It's not mine, but it certainly sounds cool. So because of that, really, the way nerve cells do their job, they have three types of jobs, and because no expense is spared in the production values of these videos, I have three colors of pens, and I do hope that they're all going to be visible. But basically they break down into three functions. One, let's say we're going to put it in blue, so let's have a little dude, right? You notice my, well, that's too long, probably should have had the eraser ready. Anyway, so that's the schematic of the human body, as you can see. There are three types of function that nerve cells will serve. One of them obviously is input. So this is nervous signal coming in. So those are kind of arrows in here, coming from the spine, the limbs, the extremities. So, well, I'm going to run you through the three functions and then go in a little bit of detail. Then you get similarly output in that conducting nerve signals from the brain, from the central nervous system to the rest of the body. This is how you move, blink, breathe, importantly, and your heart beats and all sorts of good stuff happens, and you're able to interact with reality for better or for worse. For the better, one hopes, but the good of the scorpion is not the good of the frog, yes? And the last one is, this is where you can see I am ultimately a software engineer. And the last one is processing, which I'm going to put in blue. So those are effectively, this is not so much the bag of actual electrical wires as the sort of integrated chipset, the motherboard, the computer of the brain. And that tends to happen here. And this is effectively an arrow on itself. Now, all of the symptoms of MS are ultimately can be traced back to some kind of hardware failure, keeping with the analogy, in some nerve that could have any of those three functions. So in terms of input, for instance, you would have symptoms such as paresthesia, which are sort of like funny sensations in the body, electrical sensations, hypoesthesia, whereby you have less feeling, you have optical neuritis, so that's really affecting vision, you have, the list goes on, I don't know if you want to hear them all, but anything that comes in, and you can consider in this, because we have more than five senses, there's also things like balance, proprioception, which is the sense of where your body is in space, and that stuff is input. So balance, for instance, that goes into the input category. I don't know if I can be bothered to write them. Yeah, and pain, that's probably one of the big ones, because that's an erroneous input that comes in, and you feel neuropathic pain, which is in fact the type of pain that is the nerve itself that is suffering. So in green we have pain, I'm writing their numbers, if you can't read them, hypoesthesia, and then of course there's a spelling, paresthesia, optical neuritis. The reason I'm reluctant to write this is that I want to kind of stress that this list is not necessarily exhaustive, that I'm not a doctor, and although I'm wearing the t-shirt, my opinions are mine only and not those of the MS Trust. Optical neuritis and balance. Arguably some of your bladder problems, maybe kind of misreporting of the urge to pee, there's little details, it goes kind of, it goes quite deep into any input. into the central nervous system. Now output that's much easier because it's really about coordination, or arguably coordination is processing, but it's mobility, dexterity, this kind of stuff. So in red we have mobility issues. Spasticity, that's an interesting point, in that when the muscles are hypertonic, that is, they're more tense, their default state is to be more tense than they should be, so just a little bit all the time. That's output, in that the signal to tense your muscles is kind of erroneously coming from your brain, very much in the same way that you got erroneous signals coming in. Mobility, spasticity, dexterity. It's very rhyming. Arguably some bladder problems as well. I mean, I certainly know I need to all times kind of get the signal right to open the tap. Let's move on swiftly, as it were. And processing, finally, that's much more interesting to me, certainly, because I think things coming in, well, a lot of the signal coming in from the body ultimately is the spine and sort of the upper spinal column, the bulb, and so on. Same deal for things going out, but there's much more, the brain is much more involved. Like lesions in the brain will tend to affect all three, whereas evidently lesions outside of the brain cannot affect processing because processing happens in the brain. And this is where it's interesting to me because certainly the argument I was making about neural plasticity a minute ago applies very much here. So in here we have anxiety, depression, fatigue, I guess, cognitive issues, attention issues, says the man who goes off on tangent and was distracted by his cat. I forgot where I was. Memory issues? I didn't even do it on purpose, I swear. I wish I was that good. Memory issues, I mean, it's all issues, obviously, maybe I don't need to write that down. So, well, I mean, I'm going to stop there. This is going to be my first video about the types of symptoms. So think about the idea that you can classify all the symptoms of multiple sclerosis into those three categories, and this relates heavily to where the lesions are. So we'll go into detail into subsequent videos as to how those lesions appear and evolve, and what does it mean for symptoms. And again, bearing in mind I can't believe I'm going to say this, bearing in mind the mission statement of those videos, to shed some light, to try and demystify the unpredictability of MS, so that if you're a sufferer, you can get a sense, if not of agency, at least of understanding of your condition, and if you are someone around the sufferer, it will help you contextualize the suffering, well, the symptoms and the difficulties of your acquaintance that suffers from MS, and in turn, both of those things can help us find some appropriate mitigation strategies for those symptoms, because as you can imagine, it's going to depend a lot on the type of symptom, also on its timing and other kind of various qualities and properties. So stay tuned. If you're young, it used to be a time that you had to tune a radio to hear a program, so you have to stay tuned because you could tune out. You see, there's a big knob. There's something called FM. So still people still do that. It's like a podcast through the air. You'll get the hang of it. Anyway, stay, subscribe. Like and subscribe. Or don't, I don't give a shit. I'm meant to keep it PG-13. Keep it clean. Anyway, that's it for me. If I can find a way to turn this off, I will see you in the next video.